Okay, this is the Biennial Audits Oversight Commission. I'm Councilman Eric Costello from the 11th District, Chair of the committee. Joined to my left by Director of Finance, Henry Raymond, Comptroller Joan Pratt, Councilman Bill Henry from the 4th District, and Inspector General Isabel Cumming. And I believe we are expecting Council President Scott and Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 7th District. Tonight's hearing is televised, so please be sure to speak into the microphone. If you're not speaking into the microphone, I will likely interrupt you and ask you to speak into the microphone because while we can hear you in here, folks who are watching at home cannot hear you. So with that, we are going to start off with approval of the minutes from the previous meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. And we've been joined by Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 7th District. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Minutes are adopted. Next up, we have, we have summary of findings from the 2019 Group A audits. I'm going to turn it over to the City Auditor for that. Josh Pash.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Madam Comptroller, Honorable Commission members. My name is Josh Pash. I am the City Auditor. I am here to present the BAOC briefing. I would like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the Department of Audits team. They are great to work with, and they got me up to speed quickly and made it possible to complete what we've completed in such a short time. I would also like to thank the agencies who have been very supportive of the audit process and helped us get through this as quickly as possible. As part of the presentation, I will go through the audits we've completed this year and give the planned dates for the audits to be completed after this meeting for this year. And then I will go through the findings. So we completed the Mayor's Office of Human Services for financial audit July 31st, 2019, and the performance audit on September 4th, 2019. Department of Public Works was completed for financial on October 31st, and the performance was completed on September 26th. Baltimore City Information Technology was completed on December 11th for the financial and October 24th for the performance. Department of Finance was completed on December 18th for the financial and November 7th for the performance. Department of General Services is planned to be completed on December 31st for both the financial and the performance. We did have, it was a little bit onto the wire. We're going to make that deadline. I want to thank Chi-Chi for stepping up and really putting a lot of effort into making it, and we plan to have that one completed by December 31st this year, both of those. Department of Housing and Community Development, that is also planned to be completed by December 31st for the financial, and the performance was issued on November 14th. Fire Department is planned to be issued for financial on December 31st, and the performance audit was issued on December 18th. BDC for financials audited out by an outside firm, so that was not within our scope, and the performance audit was issued on September 26th. In the interest of time and to express that many of the findings which I will present today, that'll be reporting today affect multiple agencies, I will present them by finding and then list all the agencies that we have noted the finding with. The first finding that I'm going to present is overstated account balances and negative cash balances. This specifically relates to the grant statements, and we had reportable findings on MOHS, DPW, and BSIT. The MOHS and the BSIT were reconciliations with the CAFR, and the financial statements didn't reflect those, and so those were more of a presentation issue than an actual funding issue that needed to be corrected. And for DPW, we found the $5.6 million in the revenue, and DPW went and transferred those funds so they can get utilization of those. We also found missing payroll documentation in BSIT and Department of Finance. These were related mostly to the ransomware attack, which a lot of data was lost. And we also noted that for Department of Finance, that one of their agencies, BRC, was missing missing timesheets of which we couldn't validate the numbers. And that was a reportable finding. We noted lack of proper segregation of duties at DPW. This was mostly at the revenue collection duties at the Northwest Transfer Station and the Quarantine Road landfill. And we noted that with the revenue collection and cash collection, that the duties were not segregated properly in order to give a clear picture and have significant controls, and management has addressed those findings. We also noted in DPW operational inefficiencies. We found there that at those two locations that they had frequent internet outages, which halted operations on a regular basis. We noted that when our audit team was out there that they weren't able to continue because of those, and DPW has noted that they are looking to address those with IT and maybe some other methodologies. For MOHS, we noticed that service organization control reports were not obtained. For the MOHS, they use a number of software applications that are provided as a service, and a number of those applications have personally identifiable information. And as an organization, as a city, the expectation and the general procedure is that those service providers, those software providers, will get an independent audit attesting to the controls, the safeguards, the backups that those systems have to basically do an audit of them. And we noted a number of their systems that had not obtained those service organization, those SOC reports. That concludes the financial audits, and now I will go through the performance audits and the related findings for those. So we noted a number of agencies had missing documentation. The missing documentation ranged from causes of the ransomware, data that was lost in IT upgrades, and we also noticed for MOHS that the metric was reporting data from third parties who were receiving private grant funds, as well as a city who was receiving federal and state funds, and those parties that were receiving private grants were not required to use the system and did not. And so our finding was we weren't actually able to substantiate the actual metric, actual results, because not all of the parties were reporting into the system. So we noticed missing documentation for BSIT, BDC, MOHS, and DPW. We also, for BDC, we had a finding where they had a change in the methodology of their calculation, and that was for the target was for jobs retained in or added to the city per FTE, and we noticed that they changed how they calculated it, and there was a discrepancy from year to year, and the budget book did not have a description explaining the change in methodology, and it was not clear to a user of the budget book what was, why there was such a discrepancy. And so Finance and the agency both agreed that when they were going to have a change in how they calculate the target or the actuals, that they would put a note in the budget book going forward.
Also been joined by Council President Scott.
We noted BSIT, BDC, DHCD, and Department of Finance. The performance measure is not reasonable. Typically, I don't like to give a finding like this, but in this case, we noted. So for BSIT, the performance measure was number of calls received in 311. And when we were looking into the measure, the consensus was that there was no way they could control or even affect how many calls in 311 they would get. And so the recommendation there was to find a metric which their actions would influence the metric so that it would be an indicator of the performance of the agency. The BDC, number of jobs created, the methodology of which they were calculating it, they were using a multiplier from the census data that wasn't relevant to the area of which they were presenting for, and skewed the results. DHCD, number of inspections. For DHCD and Department of Finance, the reason we've identified performance measures not reasonable is because the difference between the target and the actual was so great. So for DHCD, the number of inspections, the difference between the target and the actual was 30% and 25%. And for Department of Finance, revenue generated annually, the difference between the actual and target was 113%. And what our recommendation and what our perspective was is that if you have a target which you're either always going to miss or you're always going to make by a wide margin, then it's not really a target you're shooting for and doesn't steer your operations or indicate whether performance is doing well. We noted a lack of automated controls for data validation. This was Department of Finance, and this was for the metric number of vendors registered in CityBuy. And we noted that in CityBuy, there weren't specific controls to prevent multiple vendors from, the same vendor from entering the information in multiple times. And so the Department of Finance noted that they are having an upgrade to the software, and they also have some back-end reviews to identify duplicate vendors. We noted finding lack of reconciliation or verification for BDC and DHCD. For those two, they had a very complicated and involved process combining or reconciling multiple databases, and we tried to validate and verify the documentation to support that wasn't there. The recommendation and the agreement with the agency was to unify the databases and simplify the process and get some economies of scale by doing that. Department of Finance was specifically with their disposal of city assets, and we noticed that the manual logs didn't agree to the general ledger, and so that was addressed there. We noticed a lack of audit trail and a lack of segregation of duties over inventories for MOHS. And that was specifically with homeless prevention and outreach services. And by the nature of the service, they are dealing with homeless people and are not able always to capture validating data to have support for their numbers. So they are working on different ways to have a validation process to verify that, and also for the delivery of outreach services, there was no effective way to validate those were issued properly. I've summarized the follow-ups. So when we do any audit, we take the previous audit report and we review the follow-up findings, the recommendations, and the audit findings from the previous audit report, which sometimes go back years, to identify they've been implemented, partially implemented, or not implemented. And this table here is a summary of that, and if there's any questions, I can speak to those. So the fire department had 7 of their prior audit recommendations implemented, 3 were partially implemented, and 1 was regarding a system that hadn't been completed, and so we will look at that the next time we do an audit. The not applicable means that those metrics are they're no longer performance measures, and so they're not related to these performance audits. For BSIT, we had 3 unknown, and that was related to not getting feedback and not getting clarity and documentation from BSIT. BSIT came into the Board of Estimates on October and displayed their plan going forward there, and they met with us, and we were satisfied with their plan going forward. DHCD had 8 findings implemented, 1 was not implemented, and 4 not applicable. Department of Finance had 7 implemented, 4 partially implemented, 2 not implemented. DPW had 2 implemented, 1 partially implemented, and 2 not implemented. And MOHS had 2 that were reliant on a system which wasn't completed, and so we will look at that the next round we do audits.
We're gonna pause here and jump to the agencies. You can, and for the agency folks, you can just sit at your chairs. There's no need to come up to the podium. Josh, we're gonna start with Baltimore Development Corporation. If anyone's wondering the order of the agencies that we're doing today, with the exception of Michael Braverman in Housing, who asked to go last, he's a glutton for punishment, I suppose. I just did a random function in Excel today to pick what order we're going in. So I want to start with BDC. I noticed in their report that there is no follow-up on recommendations issued from the previous report. Were there no recommendations made in the 2017 BDC audit?
There were no follow-up findings there were no audits there weren't any findings from prior audits.
Okay, there was no findings in the 2017. Okay, great. And then just to close the loop on that, for DGS, I'm assuming that you're looking at previous recommendations as required by the charter, right?
Right, and those are slated to be completed and issued
Yeah.
by the end of the year.
Got it. And then only other question I have for BDC, recommendation number 2, it says the new system will be implemented by December 31 of 19. Are we still on track for that?
So we've gone to a...
Kim, if you can state your name and
Sure,
agency.
sorry. Hi, Kim Clark, Executive Vice President with Baltimore Development Corporation, speaking for the President, who wasn't at BDC for the years that were covered in the audit. So yes, the problem with a database is that to buy one that's super effective, that would enable us to combine all of our different reporting systems, would be at a cost of about $100,000 that we don't have in our budget. So we are trying to implement, we've started using Airtable, and we're finding that that's pretty effective. That's a free database. And because of the amount of time that certain people in our office use it, we're able to accumulate hours to be able to use it. We're still finding that we can't use it for everything because it doesn't have the capacity to handle everything. So there's still the issue of this separate reporting and trying to reconcile that. So we're still trying to work our way through that and continue to look for the new and innovative that's available to us at a cost that we can afford.
Got it. Todd, is this something that BSIT can assist BDC with at all? Microphone, please.
Absolutely. We will be glad to help out. I think there are probably several solutions. Just hearing you talk about it just had me thinking in terms of how can this scale, and we want to make sure whatever database we use can scale, can be backed up, and recover if needed. So we will definitely reach out to help.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, if you could reach out to them before the holiday just to start the conversation.
Sure.
Thank
Will
you.
do.
Colleagues, any other questions for BDC? All right. Thank you. You guys are dismissed. DPW?
I asked them my questions at BOE.
You're good. John, can we talk about, or I guess Matt, can we talk about the status of, on page 7 and 8 of the audit report, prior findings? I think there's 5 of them. Can we talk about those last 2 that are not implemented on page 8? One was inability to verify the accuracy of the reported amounts of recycling tonnage collected, and the other one is not meeting performance targets for percent of missed trash and recycling pickups. Or I guess John.
Good afternoon. My name is John Chalmers. I'm the Bureau Head for Solid Waste. As it relates to the accuracy of reporting on the recycling, at that particular time, recycling was categorized as curbside recycling only. But recycling for the city is recycling as a whole. Whether it's picked up curbside or it's picked up at one of our convenience centers, recycling is recycling. So we changed the verbiage in the scorecard to reflect that recycling is recycling and not only slated for curbside collection.
Okay, thanks. And it says DPW provided auditors with truck tickets for selected dates for testing. However, DPW does not have a process to ensure the accuracy of recycling tonnage collections. So you're saying that's corrected. Josh, do you concur with that? You can sit. You don't have to get up every time. Microphone though, please. Microphone.
So I can kind of respond to that. So there was an inaccuracy of the tonnage tickets and tracking the tonnage tickets. Again, we lack the technology that we need to manage the services, manage data. So a tonnage ticket is collected at one of the MRFs. It's brought back into the office. It's then handed off to a supervisor. Supervisor hands it off to an admin person, and that information is captured. So it lacks the mechanism to make sure there are few errors. And if we had the technology to really track that, we would be in a better place. But so there was some inaccuracies with the tonnage tickets, locating tonnage tickets and making sure that things were in place. We are actively looking for technology to streamline services a lot better, to make sure we put ourselves in a better position to have accurate information.
Got it. And Todd, is that something that BSIT's assisting with, or? Sorry, I'm going to be putting you on the
That's
spot.
okay.
for each
I'm
of
not
you.
sure exactly who you're working with, whether it's Yogi from DPW or whether it's from our team. We're certainly glad to help. We are doing a number of things with Department of Public Works, so I don't know the specifics of.
Yeah, so it would be great to sit down and work with you. We're actually looking at vendors. We're looking at our IT department to come up with some solutions to this problem. But it would be nice to sit down with you, see what we can
Okay.
come up with.
Can we make sure that you guys connect before the holiday just to start that conversation?
Yes.
Thank you. And then the, pardon me, the next one didn't meet performance targets for percent of missed trash and recycling pickups. And you all said implemented. The Bureau would like to point out that service requests upon which this performance is based are Southwest Mixed Refuse and Southwest Recycling. Although these SRs are used to report mixed refuse and missed recycling pickups, they are not exclusive to those concerns. And you had responded, not implemented. A process to collect measurable data to support the performance measure currently does not exist. Is that?
Right, so that was simply, the metric was only talking about the recycling, and the way they captured it, they captured mixed refuge and recycling all together, and we tried to kind of break it out. There was no way to identify it. So there was a couple ways to address it. One way was they could either break it out and then report it, or they could just change, say, we're reporting both combined. I believe their action plan was to add flags in Salesforce to identify each one, which should resolve the issue.
Okay. Or 1 second, I just want to let Mr. Chalmers respond.
So that is correct. We work with Salesforce to add a drop box. So this service actually captures all of the different nuances of a missed pickup. A missed pickup is not simply a missed pickup until we go out and do an investigation to determine if it was actually a crew error, if it was something that was set out late, or it was something that the citizen called in because we got there late, but it was picked up. So we added a drop-down box to capture just the crew error. So when we're pulling out our numbers, we're able to pull out just the crew error for mixed refuse and recycling.
Councilman?
I did want to take a minute and go back and ask a quick question about the finding previously about DPW not meeting the targets for the number of rat burrows baited. And people, my friends in DPW and those who occasionally watch the council meetings will know that this is a drum I've been beating for several years, that we have, I think we would do a better job of hitting our targets for baiting rat burrows if we addressed the baiting in a proactive rather than a reactive fashion. Right now, we have an opt-in system where when an inspector sees a rat burrow on a property, they leave a form asking the person who owns the property to fill out the form and send it in to give the city permission to come back and bait the burrow. And what some of the other surrounding subdivisions do is they have an opt-out system where they just come by and leave a notice saying, we're going to be back in a certain number of days to bait this burrow unless you tell us why we shouldn't. Like if you have pets or you have kids playing in the yard and you don't want us to be putting poison in the rat burrow, opt out. But we have had a great deal of difficulty, Mr. Chair, in trying to get everybody in the same line so that we can do this more proactive opt-out approach. And I was wondering if this could be a way to call that to everyone's attention so that the next time we visit this particular performance measure, everyone is aware that this is another way we can be doing a better job of hitting the targets.
Duly noted.
Thank you.
Any colleagues, any other questions for DPW? I've got one last one on the bottom of page 7. This is inspection and follow-up action checklist for detecting and preventing rats. DPW said implemented, SOPs were developed, standard operating procedures, SOPs were developed, requiring an employee's signature. Checklists are appropriately prepared and retained. The auditor said that was only partially implemented. The SOPs were developed. However, the checklists were not always prepared, and the lead schedule signed by management did not include all required data.
Correct. What we found was the design of the control was there, and the rollout to all of the, I believe, inspectors did not come out completely. So when we went and we sampled to see if it was being put into practice, we noticed that all of the checklists were not being completed, and this was noted to the agency.
So that's true. So we revisited the SOP, reinstituted it again. Once again, we're looking for handheld devices that will eliminate this enormous amount of paperwork that goes into what the pest control workers go through each day. We have 14 pest control workers, upward of 60 inspection sheets per day. And again, we definitely can do a better job with the check and balances with the management team. But again, I'm looking for technology, handheld devices where we can upload these pictures in real time, close out requests, and eliminate some of the inaccurate reporting.
Is that something that DPW is putting in or has put in a budget request for this upcoming fiscal year?
We've put in some CIP requests. We've put in some things for the Innovation Fund, constantly looking for funding for some of the things that we need.
Director Raymond, is this something we can try and get funded in this upcoming budget through the Innovation Fund?
Excuse me, yes, we will review it as part of the budget submission process related to the Innovation Fund.
Okay. I hope that we can take this one as seriously as possible, considering John's team is probably one of the hardest working teams in city government and is just grossly underfunded and under-resourced and understaffed. So it sounds like this is something that would increase productivity.
Yes, and I'd just like to add, as part of the auditor's findings, we kind of streamlined the paperwork for the pest control workers. Instead of having 2 worksheets to fill out per day, we're down to 1. We condensed it down to make it a little easier.
Less bureaucracy is good. Any other questions for DPW? Councilman?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if this is a question for DPW or for the auditor, but I had a question about the financial audit, specifically about the $5.6 million that had been in the grant account since 2007. And I wanted to just be respectful, kind of like Ms. Clark had said with BDC. I don't know if either one of you would in a position to have been dealing with that back in 2007, but has anyone come up with, through any type of investigation, why that money was not moved over to HCD when sanitation enforcement moved over to HCD back 12 years ago?
Not to my knowledge, Councilman. I don't know if I'm here with our CFO. I don't think we've been able to identify that.
You don't have to come, unless you have something to add to that.
Okay. So that, yeah, that, I was just curious if anyone knew like how the money originally ended up not getting moved and why it just sat there. Okay. But then the other question I had was, and this might be more for the city auditor, the findings made it clear that this was noted in the previous audit, in the previous biennial audit for DPW, which struck me as a little bit of a surprise because I didn't remember going through that at our biennial audit oversight commission conversation about the first round of audits. So I went back and looked at my copy of the biennial financial audit for DPW, and it didn't have any findings in it. Then I went on to the website, and the copy that is now on the website now has an additional document that includes the findings and the management response from that. And I was curious about when that was added to the public record, and if anyone could speak to why that wasn't shared with this commission and the public back when the audit was originally presented.
So you had presented this to me earlier in the year, and when I went back, so according to the Yellow Book standards, when we do a financial audit, required to do certain internal control procedures, not a full-blown audit of internal controls. Why is there's a disclaimer in the second report, and there's actually 2 audit reports. And since Tandy and I have been here, we've been including those in the reports. I do not have, I asked around, I looked into it, I don't know why they weren't published. When I did do my inquiries, it was, I was told that the Board of Estimates and that the copies that we gave to, I guess, city management did include those. So what I had mentioned to you is we're working to get all these completed, but once we get past this December 31st, I'm more than happy to go back and update those historical ones to include those reports.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions for DPW? John, thank you for fantastic work that your team does every day. DPW, you guys are dismissed. Fire? Fire?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I didn't see you, Chief. I'm
That's
sorry.
all right.
John was sitting right in front of you. That's all right.
Don't yell fire in a crowded council chambers.
Well played. Well played. Chief, let's start with page 8 of your report on the performance side. I'm not even. Josh, help me out here. I'm on page 8.
So when
What is
in the
that
prior
from?
year, in the prior audit, the metric reported was 85%, and then when our audit team went out and validated it.
No. What metric? I'm not seeing in there what the metric.
Oh, it's the title of the thing. Service 608, Emergency Management.
Summary. I'm not seeing where that is, but that's fine.
This was percentage of city agencies with a completed COOP plan.
Okay. All right. So So 6 agencies are outstanding.
So this is a bit complicated, and when we looked at the city policy, stated that the MOEM should not necessarily spearhead, but coordinate, and all agencies should work with them. And in between the lines, I guess it was communicated that if an agency was preparing their own COOP plan, also known as disaster recovery plan, that was fine. We did notice, we did get a status update from the MOEM, and they had basically metrics and tracking of who was in what position for all the agencies that were participating with them. It wasn't updated, which was part of our finding, but that they were actually tracking it. And so when it comes to this, I think that there's a miscommunication from city management to MOEM, whether what role they have and what authority they have. One of the things that they mentioned back was there's not a enforcement power over them. Part of our recommendation was that if you present this at a public forum at CityStat, then that's really kind of your that's your enforcement authority. But so our recommendation was really to give clarity in the administrative manual that, you know, this is authority, this is the role. If we are trying to centralize the COOP plan and the disaster recovery plan, and if we want to have one central place to go to say, okay, who's going to do what and what's the status of everything, then they really need to have all the agencies reporting into them and giving a status update. And so when we did the follow-up, it was really an opt-in or an opt-out given to the agencies, and so that's where we kind of get with the complication.
Chief?
OEM has, I think Director David McMillan reported out, OEM falls separately from the fire department at this time. I'm sorry, OEM falls separately from the fire department at this time, and I believe he did report out to auditing about it.
So I think part of the challenge was that
So is MOEM still part of the fire department or no?
They're currently part of our budget, but they report separately.
Okay.
So I believe it reports directly to the mayor's office, and we work directly with MOEM. The way the budget book is written, it came within the scope of this, and so that we came up. Basically, just in summary, when we read the policy, it was MOEM is supposed to coordinate and...
I get it. Yeah, pardon me. I don't mean to be rude. So we're just going to skip the MOEM stuff, and we're going to have them come back in February, and then we can get this addressed. So Nina, if you can please let them know. And then it sounds like what we need is some type of directive from the mayor to OEM and to the agencies for those that aren't participating. Before I go on to the next fire one, I'm going to jump to general services because this would be cruel to keep you here any longer because your reports have not been completed by the auditor yet. But Chi-Chi, I want to thank you specifically for really working very closely with the auditor to make sure that those audits get completed by the end of the calendar year. Colleagues, are there any questions for DGS, considering we have nothing to look at, to ask questions on? Oh. Councilman Henry?
Technically, I don't know, I don't know if this is an agency question or an auditor question, but given that the audits are going to be completed by December 31st, but there will not be another Board of Estimates meeting before December 31st, will we be given copies of the audit by December 31st before they go to the Board of Estimates?
I got that one. No, we will not. They have to go to the Board of Estimates first. But in my discussions with the city auditor, director of finance, and the Department of Law, it's clear that the city auditor is in compliance with the charter because the audit has been completed, even though it has not been delivered to the board yet. That's more of a bureaucratic nuance, if you will. So they've fulfilled their responsibility, but we will have Chi-Chi come back in February as well once we've had those audit reports and some time to digest them. Colleagues, any other questions for Chi-Chi, DGS? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Have a good evening. Thank you. Chief Ford, sorry for the interruption. The next one is on Moen, so I will skip that. On page 13, this is for code enforcement. There was no specific process in place to follow up after renewal notices have been sent and confirm whether all expired permits had been renewed. Fire says that policies and tools are in place for members to review expired permit lists via querying data downloaded from the mainframe database. The auditor says practices are in place in order for inspectors to follow up after renewal notices have been sent and confirm whether all expired permits had been renewed. However, these practices are not formally written and documented. Formal policies and procedures promote compliance, accountability, consistency, and sustainability. This one seems very simple. Can you formalize a policy for this?
Yes, in fact, we're sending out an email initially to the people that are associated with this responsibility to make sure we move fast on telling them, putting it in writing, then following up and making it part of our policies.
Great. Nina, can you please follow up with with me and Marguerite once that, just with the time frame for getting that policy done? Thank you. And then there is, Josh, what's this one on page 14 on the back?
Right, so the,
Is that part of code enforcement? No. Attendance per the station records did not agree with telestaff and e-time. What's telestaff and e-time? Is that your staffing system?
Telestaff is our staffing system where we set up who's on the apparatus and things like that. And E-time is a separate component that keeps.
Timekeeper?
Yeah, is the timekeeper.
Okay, all right. So attendance records did not agree with telestaff and e-time.
Yes.
Fire says this has been updated in the most recent manual of procedure, and there's now one entry made at the watch list for members. This will not be implemented until fiscal 21 with the
Yes.
conversion of Workday.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. And you guys didn't evaluate it because they're waiting until Workday, right?
correct.
Perfect. Okay. Colleagues, any other questions for Fire? All right. Chief Ford, thank you for everything that you all do. Have a good evening. BSIT. So on the performance side, BSIT did not respond. Before we jump to Todd, can you tell me when the time frame of this was? Because I'm imagining that they were dealing with recovery from the ransomware attack.
Right, so this started before the ransomware and then extended after the ransomware. And so that's where we were doing the audit. Our audit field work was during that period.
I can give the timeline. And the reason I can, because we did not reply to the audit, and as we pulled the covers on what happened, it was just a lack of accountability on the team's part. So we did a root cause analysis as to what actually happened. We actually got the request for the audit on I believe the 6th of May. The 7th, the ransomware hit. No communication or very little communication happened between then. Then in August, communication started back up, and we looked at all the emails that our team had sent to the audit group, and those are not something that were flattering to say the least. And we took that as a lesson learned of accountability and visibility to the audit, because no one really took the opportunity to say, hey, we're swamped, can we delay this? Or just really communicate what our current situation was. We took a step back, we looked at all the metrics that we had, and they just did not reflect the types of performance we were looking to drive moving forward. So we worked with the audit team, we came to the BOE and said we would restate what our metrics are and come back to the BOE. We did exactly that. We worked with audit, we worked with city stat to say, here are a set of metrics for each of our services that will drive performance moving forward that are more consistent with where we're going than the past metrics.
Got it. And what are those 7 metrics?
Say again?
What are the 7 metrics?
The 7 metrics? When you say 7, I think it's a little bit more than 7, but I can,
Oh, I thought I heard you say, perhaps I misheard you, that you presented at the Board of Estimates and said these are the 7 metrics.
the set, I'm sorry.
The set, I'm sorry,
of
I'm
metrics.
sorry. How many total are there?
Well, we have a whole slew of metrics that we use not only for city stat. A subset of those metrics go to the budget book, and I'm counting about 13 metrics for the budget book.
Nina, can we get that list as follow-up? So, Josh, and this shouldn't reflect poorly on BSIP, but as best I can tell, this I'm not pointing blame at anyone, but as best I can tell, this audit product still needs some follow-up because we don't really have follow-up on these previous items. So do you have any suggestions on how we can accomplish that?
Right. So Mr. Carter was very proactive in addressing this when we issued the report to the Board of Estimates. We had a meeting, and what the BSIT is going to do and has already started doing is basically revamp all their metrics, tie them to their objectives as an agency to the city, and what that really means is prior audit findings related performance audits are likely not going to be relevant anymore. And so depending on what metrics they go to will depend on what the follow-up is, but if the metrics are basically dropped off, then there wouldn't be any follow-up for those.
I'm concerned with the precedent that sets because any agency in the future would be able to say, well, we're changing all of our performance metrics, therefore we're not going to cooperate with your office, Josh.
So
We did not change them all. It wasn't a complete revamp of all the metrics. Some stayed in place. We can give you an accounting of exactly which ones are new, which ones have been changed, and which ones have dropped off. The ones that primarily dropped off were metrics surrounding mainframe processes. But in terms of 311, in terms of metrics for efficiencies for infrastructure, we added a number, like for instance, how well we patch our servers, how well we back up our servers. Those things will drive performance on our end, and we didn't have those things before. We had things similar or closer to like mainframe processing or the number of services that we moved from the mainframe, et cetera.
Councilman Henry? Or Josh, did you want to respond to that?
yeah, to address your concern, most of the follow-up findings had to do with policies and procedures around the metrics and not meeting targets. So when we go and look at in the future and we look at the metrics, we always look at how are you calculating them, do you have a procedure of them, which would cover prior year, and then meeting them is always, well, if you're meeting them now, then you've addressed it. You can't meet them in the past. So that would, I believe, address your concern. And then what you express, my concern is, my understanding is that the Department of Finance vets all of these. So when an agency proposes to change their metric, if Finance says, well, actually, that's something everyone needs to know, you can't change that one, or you want to put this one in here, but, whatever their vetting process. So, and I haven't audited the whole budget book and performance metric process. I'm just looking at one agency, but that's where I get my comfort from that not happening, of people just saying, I'll just change our metrics every year, and therefore we never have an audit.
And we met with Finance and City Stat in a joint meeting about 2.5 weeks ago, reviewed all the metrics, took on their suggestions, and there's some minor tweaks to them, so we feel we are aligned to that process of getting them into the budget book.
Okay, I'm satisfied with that. Councilman Henry?
Thank you. I'm actually and I think we are starting to creep into what I was going to ask about, which is, and I don't know if there could be anything more meta than a performance audit of the performance measure creation process. But that is kind of what I'm curious about, which is right now, the performance measures are developed by the agencies in cooperation with the Budget Bureau, and the Budget Bureau is putting together the budget using the performance measures in the outcome budgeting, which seems to me like there's the potential for the feedback loop that the auditor identified when you pointed out that sometimes performance measures aren't reasonable because they're clearly too easy. You know, you're teaching to the test. And so what I'm wondering is what would be involved in institutionalizing, including the Department of Audits in that loop in the development of performance measures. So to make sure that somebody outside the loop of paying the agencies to do the work that they're being judged based on how well they're meeting the performance measures that they came up with, wouldn't it make sense to have somebody else in that loop saying up front, this isn't a fair performance measure?
So how I would respond to that is, number one, the agency is the subject matter expert. And so from my perspective, they would be the first line saying, this is where we add value.
Right.
And then the Department of Finance seems to have an overall perspective of the city. What I have always offered to the organization is, if you want to draft a policy and procedure, you want to build a control, and after you build it, you want me to look at it to see, hey, are we hitting all the bases? Is there proper segregation of duties? Do you want my feedback? I'm more than happy to do that. I can't draft the metric because that would be independent, and also metrics have, I guess, two sides. One is the city has a specific goal and initiative they're trying to achieve, and they want to see how they're doing there. And then the other one is the agency has a particular industry type standard, and there's measures that that tie into that. So if a new measure wanted to come out, or someone had a question, they came to the Department of Audit to say, hey, this is what we're doing, and then we'd say, well, wait a minute, how can you track that? How do you measure that? Then that would be, we would be fine with that.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm just saying that right now, the way the system is set up, there's anywhere from a 3 to 4 year gap between when the agency and budget agree on a performance measure, it goes into the budget for the next fiscal year. That money gets, dealt with, spent, appropriated, and then 2 years after that, somebody in the auditor's department does the biennial audit and goes, hey, you might want to think about this with that performance measure. It just seems like it would make more sense to include audits up front in, during the budget formulation period, when those performance measures are being suggested by the agencies, instead of just sending them to the Budget Bureau. Maybe they send the performance measures as proposed to audits also.
I'd like to address this. As the auditor was attempting to explain previously, the audit department cannot be involved in the creation of performance metrics for agencies because it will impair their ability to then audit those performance measures at a later point in time. It's technically called impairment and lack of independence. So there's no way that the audit department can be involved assisting agencies in the creation of metrics, like say right now, 2020, and then subject those agencies through the audit process in 2 years and say, oh, this isn't a good metric. You're not, when they were previously involved in helping establish those metrics for the agency. It's real straightforward.
Right, it's very straightforward. The auditors would not be able to render an opinion because their independence would be impaired.
Okay.
Right, and then you also have to know that the metrics are to give information to management and then I guess the population. So historically and generally, an output measure is not a preferred type measure because it's the same thing as the 311 calls, like, well, we have no control over that. However, management might want to know, oh, are 311 calls going up? Are they going down? That's useful information, but it's not really a measure to measure BSET or the system's performance. And so you have to take into all those into consideration. The goal of the metrics is to give management insight and then to give the public insight into what's going on.
Well, what if one of their goals was to have public outreach, and that metrics was indeed one of the things they were looking for, to see if the 311 outreach is one of the things they were trying to achieve? I mean, if their goal was to see that the citizens of Baltimore City were utilizing the 311, and they were spending our money to advertising this, to say this is use 311, in that case, wouldn't the 311 metrics figure be important?
Right. That's what I'm saying, is that from an audit perspective, the metric really wouldn't be an indicator of the performance of the agency. However, management would, if management finds that useful and needs it, then management should make it a metric. And so having audits, in the process here, you're almost, you're putting in a criteria or a goal that's not necessarily in alignment with management who's setting the metric. And that's just kind of supporting why audits shouldn't be setting the metric.
Oh, I totally agree that audits should not be, it's the independence issue. That's not my concern. My concern was that you're saying that was a poor metrics. And I'm saying the subject matter experts and the finance people went through and determined that it wasn't metrics they wanted. So to me, it's a concern that audit would say such a metrics wasn't what they were looking for.
I understand your question now. So when we inquired of management why the discrepancy and why the metric wasn't meeting targets, their response to us was, we don't know, we can't control it, the metric is not really a good indicator of our performance, and that's what we reported.
Okay, that makes more sense. So they're acknowledging it was a poor metrics.
The agency, yes.
Right, okay. So they never should have made it to begin with. Okay.
Just want to add, in the case of the rewrite or the redoing of our metrics, we vetted them with the CityStat group, and they gave a lot of good input, not only on the metrics for the budget book, but the other metrics we use for CityStat. We got agreement there. That seemed to have been a good check and balance for us.
Any other questions for BSET? Todd, thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
MOHS?
Yep.
Nice to see you. I'm on page 12 of the audit. This has to do with percentage of households who received eviction protection grants, remain housed for at least 3 months, and number of eligible clients who maintain permanent housing for 6 months or longer. Management's position is that they are partially implemented. Can you explain to me which part has not been implemented?
As this relates to resources that are distributed by our street outreach team? No. We were currently using a tracking tool to record all of the resources that our street outreach team provides to homeless persons in the community. That form only required the signature of the recipient of the resource and also of the street outreach worker who was providing the resource. So in that way, we had partially implemented tracking of resources that were being distributed. In agreement with the auditor's recommendation, we agreed to revise that policy and that tracking tool to ensure that there would be duplicate confirmation from MOHS staff. So now we are requiring that 2 outreach workers provide signature confirmation whenever resources are given to homeless persons. And we have also added a second layer of inventory reconciliation that requires someone from our fiscal team to provide inventory oversight and reconciliation.
And Josh, you're saying that you didn't test implementation status of prior findings and recs because
It would not have passed. It was based on what was implemented. There was not enough there to test. So we already knew that it was not fully implemented and it wouldn't have passed testing, so we deferred testing to the next audit cycle.
okay. And on page 13, did not meet its targets for percent of persons moving from temporary to permanent housing. I'm assuming that's the same narrative on both ends?
Yeah, and I also just want to state that it was difficult for us to respond because all of the leadership that are currently at MOHS were not there during the period of time being tested. So we did our best, and we've moved forward.
Josh, is this, and I know you probably weren't here for most of the entrance conferences for this cycle, is this something that can be addressed moving forward in entrance conferences with agencies when there's a concern that they're not going to be able to provide anything meaningful to address what your objective is?
Yeah, during our entrance conference, we go over our scope for the current year, and then we discuss at a high level the prior findings and get that background, and then we basically send the agency the prior and get a status update with that. And then based on the status update, we design our procedures to test it. If a action plan is partially implemented, and it depends on how partially implemented it is, but if it's not implemented, then there's really nothing to test, and we just report it. And if it's partially implemented, we make that evaluation to see if there's enough there where a test would actually provide useful information to the reader of the report.
Okay. Colleagues, any other questions for MOHS? Have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Braverman, 8 out of 9 implemented. Excellent. I am on page 12 of the performance audit. This is blight elimination, I think.
It has since been implemented, if that's what you're asking
It
about.
has since been
The one
implemented.
outstanding one. We've adjusted that metric in FY21 going forward. So the current outcome-based budgeting will have it adjusted.
Okay. And Henry, you're director, you're good with that?
Good with it.
Excellent. That is outstanding. Colleagues, any questions for HCD? I wish you told me that at the beginning so you didn't sit here for an hour and a half.
I am. Just a little service we provide to our other colleagues, take the hit. Thank you.
Team player, thank you. Hope you all have a good evening. Finance, are you going to be answering? Page 11, if you want to just start with the not or partially implemented. Page 11.
Okay. Page 11, we concurred with the auditor with the original finding. We're going to change this finding because it was very complex, it was confusing. We attempted to modify it a couple of years, and at this point, we're going to come up with a new measurement.
Okay. Josh, that satisfies your concern?
Which one are we referring to?
We're on finance, page 11.
This was the performance measure for the Bureau of BBMR.
Right, yeah, our recommendation was to revise basically how the target is calculated and how its actual is calculated, and that's what they agreed to do.
Excellent. Page 12, got a couple partials.
Yes, the first one related to the inspection unit was a partial implementation. We expect it will be fully implemented by August of 20, as we convert our data fully to the Munis system that we have.
That satisfies?
Which is a finance system.
Right, yeah, we thought that the time frame was fine, and what was implemented thus far looked good.
And we're still on track for August 20?
Correct.
Excellent. 1.3? Same thing?
Yeah, the same item, Munis system implementation of 2020.
Got it. Page 13, number 2.
We have reworked our manual process to ensure that we're reconciling the data. The finding was that while we changed the process to try to implement full correction, the new process was flawed, had some issues. We've hired a new supervisor, and we believe that the corrective action is now in place.
Agree.
Excellent. And page 15.
So as it relates to this has to do with testing of sensitive classes for the driver's licenses. We need for the Department of Human Resources to complete a classification study. Once that study is completed, we'll know what the sensitive classes are, and then we'll, excuse me, then we will be able to randomly select individuals from those classifications. The reason for the finding is we don't have the sensitive classifications from HR. HR has indicated that they will complete the sensitive class study so that we can then extract the data and perform the random testing.
And that study is going to be completed by the end of 2019, correct?
Correct.
So I also know that the Workday initiative has this as one of their major bullets to make sure that these classifications are identified as they move into the new system. So from both those angles, I feel comfortable that it will be done timely.
Excellent. Colleagues, any questions for finance?
Mr. Chair, I'm looking at Finance has requested the Department of Audits close this item until DHR complete its list of sensitive position classification. Is there a substantive difference between saying that we're going to wait until we get the conclusion of DHR's work to address this, or closing it until then?
Yes, and I'll address that. The issue is the Department of Finance is receiving the finding for not being able to do the random testing of the sensitive classes.
That you are waiting on DHR to finish.
And each year, I get the finding. So I'm saying let's close it until I get the information. But in the meantime, HR has agreed to conduct their study, provide the information, and because of Workday, the data will be there, so we're moving forward.
Is there an internal process in the auditor's department to move this over to be a task for DHR for the next time you audit them?
So that would be changing in the budget book. I mean, the budget book and the metrics in the budget book are driving these scopes. And so this was related to.
And the budget book is Right.
What the issue is this was a performance metric for the Bureau of Risk Management within the Finance Department, and we didn't meet our goal because we don't have the data that we need.
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah, okay, I got you. I see your problem, all right.
But in short,
Now the
despite the
issue's
director's
resolved.
request, it's still not implemented until it's implemented. Okay. Colleagues, any other questions for finance? Henry, you want to ask yourself anything?
I'll remain silent.
Very good. Okay, excellent. Jason, you can go if you want.
Yeah, I was finishing up something.
Appreciate it.
Doing double duty.
I've gotten emails from you at this hour, so I know.
Jason's always looking for a quiet workspace.
Okay, so that concludes the testimony by the 8 Group A agency directors. Next up is discussion of performance scope for 2020 Group B audits. Josh, you can stay seated if you want, or you can stand, whatever you.
Okay.
Stand it is. I had a couple items I wanted to point out, just going through agency by agency, starting with DHR. Josh, at a minimum, can you just make sure that you're asking, I'm sorry, I'm on slide 13 in your presentation, proposed performance measures. So it's just going to jump through these really quickly, and I'm sure my colleagues have some suggestions as well. For DHR, can we ensure that that sensitive position classification audit is completed? Next, I'm on page 14. Let me know when you're ready. For parking management, service 682, I know parking authority is included in DOTs.
They're separate.
Why are we proposing to look at these two items? Because these are both functions that are managed by parking authority.
So when selecting the performance measures to review in calendar year 2020, one of our goals was to get to underlying processes to identify operational effectiveness of different processes. And we also take into consideration what's been audited over the past cycle or two. And so this is just what we came up with. There wasn't really anything beyond that. And then we've actually, in the past, noted some parking issues, collecting revenues with different parking garages. And so we figured this would also be sort of a follow-up on that.
Yeah, I guess I understand the concern, but I guess I can think of a million things at DOT that need to be audited. And because these are entirely functions of parking authority. DOT has absolutely nothing to do with either of these two things. I'm not disputing whether or not these are worthy of being looked at, because they certainly are. But DOT does not touch either of these things in any way, shape, or form. I defer to my two colleagues on the council and
Thinking resurfacing.
yeah, I mean, I'd be really interested to see if you can craft something up around resurfacing and or potholes, basically street maintenance.
They've got potholes in here.
Potholes is in here.
Oh, you got potholes, yeah.
Traffic calming?
Well, what are we, I mean, the fact that the parking meter revenue is in the millions, and that has not been audited in a long time, I actually think that's a very important area that needs to be audited. So the parking authority, if you want to make that a separate category, that would be fine, because I actually think that that's actually an important thing that needs to be looked at, and especially since you've already told me it hasn't been looked at in a while.
Doesn't parking authority have an independent audit conducted annually?
I'll defer to the Director of Finance for that one.
Yeah, the answer's yes.
So this is actually being looked at annually?
Yes.
Yeah, when I was going to begin the presentation is these were, I guess, draft or proposed.
Yeah.
I know historically that the commission has given recommendations, so like we're not necessarily wedded to any of these. What we're doing is like materiality, core processes, and then because we had noticed parking had some challenges with collecting revenue and kind of keeping tracking of parking garages, we put that in there. But to include something with resurfacing, we're fine doing that.
Perhaps, yeah, I think we did street lighting last time, 2018. What about something around erroneous citations that are issued? Parking citations? So X number of citations are issued every year by parking enforcement under Chief Goodwin. And, you know, at least on the council, we deal with folks who have erroneous citations issued. And sometimes those are abated, sometimes those go to district court. Just curious if there might be, you know, a way to weave that in.
So that would be under the parking authority?
No, that's DOT.
Okay,
It's a function that really should be at parking authority, but it's not.
no problem.
I mean, I've been complaining
I have
about
a point
it
of
for 5.5 years.
clarification.
What's that?
The parking meter revenue, I know it's audited financially, but it's not audited in a performance matter. Having been an auditor for 10 years, I would think that we would want to have the opportunity to look at it in a performance matter. Dealing, it's millions of dollars again. Because I have done cases where the audit team will say it's fine, and then when you go do an evaluation, because of the way you look at systems, you realize that a system has been done incorrectly, and hundreds of thousands of dollars have been taken. So I think it's actually an area that I would recommend we look at. Thank you. And the comptroller agrees.
Yeah. We got everyone here. except for the- Yep.
Can we go back to law for a second?
Yes, we can. Yeah, sure.
I recently had it pointed out to me by a group of constituents that apparently it is the policy in the law department when somebody makes a claim against the city for work that is done by a private contractor, that they simply refer the constituent to the private contractor and say the contractor has to tell the city, that has to demonstrate to the city that they have their own insurance to cover it. And what I'm curious about is, so how many of the claims that people are filing with the city are not even actual, because as far as I can tell, there was no investigation of the merits of the claim. The only investigation was to confirm that the problem, if it exists, was caused by someone working for the city, and therefore we're just punting it to them. And can we dig into that a little bit and find out how many of our how many of the claims that constituents are filing aren't even actually being investigated by our law department because we don't look into the merits of the case?
I'd have to see what data the city is capturing on that to be able to see if it was something that'd be audible.
Okay.
Okay, back to DOT. I don't disagree with you, Madam Inspector General. I think this audit product is not the appropriate place for this. Is this something that you might have the capacity to do in a separate product or a look at parking authority?
Right. I mean, we could add a fourth metric to this project and, include resurfacing and include the revenues in addition. We could scope that in because at this point, we have time to make that.
Well, we could do a special audit.
Of parking authority? Yeah, let's do a special one for parking authority, because DOT is just a gold mine of things to look at, and I wouldn't want to.
That's very kind, Mr. Chair.
I wouldn't want to look at this and ignore something else that really has an impact on quality of life for citizens.
Okay.
BPD. So we have a. I know you have this percent of priority 1 calls for service dispatch to officers in less than 60 seconds. Could your office take a look at the commissioner's crime plan and see if there's opportunities to align the performance measures we're looking at with the performance measures that he has put forth in that crime plan? Because that's kind of the standard moving forward, no offense, irrespective of what's in the budget book. I mean, that, you know, the standard is the crime plan, and the mayor's been explicitly clear on that. So let's just make sure that, you know, this is aligned with that. Yes.
I had a conversation with the solicitor about the overtime study that is already being conducted separately in conjunction with the suit that was filed against the department about overtime, and whether it would be a conflict for us to do a performance audit on overtime. And what I understood from the solicitor is that there's a very specific date range that the study is focused on relating to the suit, and that if we were to do a performance audit of the overtime system at the police department for the period after the end point of that study, there would be no conflict. And so I would want to ask, is that something that the commission would deem worthwhile?
Can I make a comment first?
Please.
I received a call from the Maryland Office of Legislative Audits, and the state legislator had mandated them to do an audit of the police, which they plan on starting in March of 2020. I had a conversation with them so that our audit would not overlap with theirs. They haven't finalized the scope, but they said they're pretty sure that overtime would be included in the scope of that.
Okay, and this is performance, not financial.
I don't think they do financial audits.
Okay, all right.
Great.
Well, should we?
I mean, I think it's probably a little overkill, considering OLA has vastly more resources than the Department of Audits at the city level. And the other consideration I would add is that audit that has been commissioned by the Department of Law is expected to be completed probably in late spring, early summer of 2020. And at that point, Josh's team will have already started their audit or initiated their audit with BPD. So it seems to be.
Do we have any idea when the OLA audit would be complete?
They said they expect to take 6 to 9 months. And my plan is to touch base with them once they kind of do their kickoff to get an idea of what their scope is, so that we aren't duplicating efforts.
Okay, thank you. You
Last
learn
thing
a lot when you come to these hearings.
Last thing on BPD, this last one, can we include something on recruitment volume? And in conjunction with what the commissioner has started with Recruit Stat. So the commissioner is looking at each step of the recruitment process, right? From the moment that you click on the link to the moment that you get sworn in and get your badge and gun. And I don't know if there's a way to coordinate with or to at least talk with City Stat to see what they're looking at and see if you can come up with ideas on how to improve that process. The commissioner's been very vocal about the need to more effectively and efficiently recruit being a top priority in the department.
What is the objective? Like, I guess, what are you looking to get out of that?
I think it would be determine the extent to which BPD has effectively revamped its recruitment process. And then criteria would be existing BPD policy, direction from Judge Brevard regarding the consent decree around recruitment, and staffing needs as identified by the department, including but not limited to the recent staffing study that is out in draft for comment.
Okay.
Colleagues, any others for BPD before we move on? For recreation and parks, on this item for the trees, total trees planted by city crews, one thing that you may or may not be aware of, we have a number of nonprofit partners in the city that Rec and Parks contracts with, and as well as coordinates with, regarding planting trees. Can you just make sure that that's in scope as well? Just so we have a total picture of all the efforts to maintain and improve the tree canopy in the city.
Yes.
And when you talk about percentage of pools meeting maintenance standards, everyone in this room is aware of the fact that pool maintenance has been an issue. Are you thinking of, looking at the extent to which BCRP is following their own policy for when maintenance checks should be happening, or are you thinking the extent to which pools are open? It's a really cold day to be talking about pools, but the extent to which they're open during their normal operating hours. For example, Riverside Pool was closed for the first 2 months of last season. Is that something that would come up in this, or?
So I haven't dug into the metric to know when we put on the agenda, we were looking at, are we doing our regular and maintenance schedule? I can look in to see the opening and closing and see how that would fit in, if that would be something that would be like far out of scope, or if that would be something related, and then get back to you on that.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be helpful. Anyone else for Rec and Parks?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Councilman?
I'm just curious if could be some type of measurement that would look at the trees that are being trimmed, as opposed to, and maybe even extending to stumps.
Can you say that last thing again?
Stump removal. Trees trimmed and stump
I love
removal.
that.
Yeah.
There's stumps being ground outside the 5th district.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyone for Department of Planning? Health?
Yes, sir. So at the recent hearing of the Health Committee, we had a presentation by the department in which they made it clear that incidents of lead poisoning are starting to go back up. And I thought at least one of the performance measures we should look at would be how they're dealing in identifying and helping to mitigate incidences of lead paint poisoning.
Especially since one of our investigations, we found that they had spent $170,000 on tchotchkes. So I think where the lead paint money goes is important.
Okay, and just I want a clarification. What's your goal of? What would you like to get out of that report? So I know.
If the chair is okay with this, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back to my office after this and pull the committee agenda and go back and look through my notes. And can I send you some suggestions and copy the rest of the commission?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
We
sure.
plan on doing most of our scoping at the beginning of 2020.
Great. Okay.
Anyone else for Health? For MOAD, this middle one, percent of youth opportunity participants who avoid becoming involved in the juvenile or adult criminal justice system while enrolled. What is youth opportunity? Do you mean YouthWorks?
I believe that's what the metric is measuring.
Oh,
No,
okay.
It's not YouthWorks.
This is different.
Yeah, this is targeted to youth between, I guess, the ages of 18 and 24 that
This is
are.
what the Yo centers do.
Yes.
Oh, that's what the.
It's a program.
I just wasn't smart enough to piece together the acronym YO as youth opportunity. My apologies.
But if I might add, I'd like in addition to these, I'd like a measurement that looks at the total number of participants to show our recruiting efforts and how successful we are at actually getting young people into the program.
Yep.
So this proposed performance measure, percent of youth opportunity participants who avoid becoming involved in the juvenile or adult criminal justice system while enrolled, because that's something that they do already track.
Yes.
Okay. Do you already know how long they track that for?
No.
Okay. All right.
And,
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I know this is kind of a negative measure, saying, as far as that they don't become involved in the juvenile or criminal justice system while enrolled, but is there another measure that shows what they are doing? Are they in some kind of training? Are they gainfully employed, or are they just not doing anything?
So I'm not sure about the Youth Opportunity Program. The next metric that we have in there is basically looking at getting a credential from the program.
Okay. Got it. All right. That'll cover it.
Colleagues, anyone else for MOAD? Okay. Oh, yeah. So we got an opinion from the Department of Law. So I guess this is. Okay. Okay. All right. So this is new business, and then we'll discuss the agenda. So you all should have received an email today. Therefore, to give, in short, we can't have proxy votes. Okay. And then, do we have the ability to compel an agency to comply with the auditor? We received a response on that. And the real way that the auditor can compel an agency is through a Freedom of Information Act request, but it sounds like every agency has been cooperative with you to date.
We did have with the Homeless Works certain information that was considered classified and personally identifiable health information, of which was a bit of a challenge. So we worked with legal. By the end of the report, we ended up that we weren't able to get the information to report on it, but we did set up time to meet with legal to determine what our authority is there. I guess typically audits is given the, right to see everything to basically verify. It's almost kind of like a quality check review, but the charter doesn't give us that level. So if it's considered confidential, then we're not necessarily privy to it without getting permission.
Got it. Okay, and then the last one, there was a question of $41 million agency cash balance for MOHS. Director Raymond.
Excuse me. So we've confirmed that there was no general fund balance for MOHS. It was primarily timing differences, and it was all grant related.
Okay. Agenda for next meeting. We will discuss DGS. We will have MOEM here. Nina's going to help coordinate a couple follow-up items so we can discuss those. And approve minutes.
Do we have a date yet?
We do not have a date yet. Marguerite will be reaching out at some point in the next 2 to 3 weeks to coordinate that. And I believe that is all we have for the next meeting. In the meantime, can we connect before the new year with, or let's say like the first week of January with revised performance measures based on tonight's discussion?
Yes.
Awesome. Excellent. Thank you. Any more colleagues? Anyone else? All right. Thank you all very much. We're in recess.